Michigan history. It's the largest collection in the state on Detroit and Michigan history, and also genealogy. So if there's any genealogists out there today, I can sympathize with you. I've been doing it about 50 years at this point in time and have my family back to the 1780s. I was an archivist there, so I have a background on that. But basically, it's my time in the Burton collection when I acquired all this information. And I taught Michigan history at Oakland Community College also for about 12 years. So bathtub gin and rum running, Prohibition in Detroit and Michigan.
So if you just, yep, there you go.
Went beyond. Okay. All right, Bathtub Gin. This is a movie put out in 1939 called The Roaring Twenties, and we can identify Jimmy Cagney on the right. The man on the left is Frank McHugh. And so it looks like they're making bathtub gin. And I start out with the question, can you make gin in a bathtub? And if I was giving the talk live, I would let you answer, but I'll give you the answer right now. No, you can't, because it has to ferment. And so you've got to have a closed container. And so what does this term bathtub gin mean? Bathtub gin means any kind of illegal liquor. And what they're doing actually here is they are diluting it. Actually, no liquor served during Prohibition is not diluted, because they're going to make more money off of it. And I'm going to be going into how much money we're talking about here, because that's always a question. Now, well, how much money do they really make? Well, they made really big money. And so what they're doing here is the bottles that are sitting there is the bottle that people like. All right, they like that type of bottle, but obviously it's tall and it's not going to fit in a sink. That's why they are diluting it in the bathtub, so that they can dilute it using the funnel and have the bottle the size that people drink, and so that they like to use that during the 20s. And Prohibition, by the way, began, we're going to see it later, but I'll give you the information now. Prohibition begins in January of 1920, and it doesn't end until December of 1933. So that makes it actually 14 years. Now, a lot of people think Prohibition was, well, I went for 3 or 4 years. It went for 14 years. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about anything from 2006 to today. All of that is Prohibition every day in the United States. There's no Prohibition in Canada, and the rest of the world doesn't do Prohibition, but the United States does it. We're going to go into the details of why and how it actually was, it came into being. So history of Prohibition in general in the United States, as early as 1657, and we're talking 1620 is the Plymouth Landing in Massachusetts. So they're saying in 1657, the sale of strong liquor to Indians is made illegal. Well, we know that the fur trappers regularly just had nothing to do with that, and they went forward and sold and traded for liquor with the Indians on that. In 1784, a physician at that time, Benjamin Rush, is coming out saying the use of alcohol is injurious to the physical and psychological health of people. Well, so it's just as right after the Revolution. By 1818, there's 11 temperance societies in the United States. And at this point in time, women are seen as the arbiter or the person who's going to make the decision in the family of the moral authority in the home. And women reject alcohol as a threat to the home. The Women's Christian Temperance Union starts in 1873. And this is for the prohibition of alcohol to prevent abuse from alcoholic husbands. Now, the men in immigrants actually were in favor of, we're not in favor of prohibition, and we're going to get that a little more. But the women said that alcohol has ruined the family, and we'll take a look at this. This was a cartoon, in effect, a cartoon put in the paper, and this would have been in the maybe the 1870s or so, something like that. although this sort of thing is drawn in a book, but in a newspaper, it wouldn't get in. You don't get photos in newspapers until after 1900, and you get line drawings. But this probably was from a particular book, and here it is. The husband has gone out, he's gotten drunk, and come home. He wants to beat one of his children. His wife is coming in to help them, and they're all trying to save him. And so this was the way things were depicted at the time. There's a name you probably recognize. Carrie Amelia Nation. Carrie A. Nation. She's literally born Carrie Amelia Moore. Her first husband she marries is an alcoholic. Well, she divorces him and marries a lawyer whose name is David Nation. So her name was Carrie Amelia Nation. Well, she makes it into Carrie A. Nation. Carrie a Nation. I'm sure you're seeing and understanding what I'm saying there. She joins the WCTU in 1874, and that's just a year after it starts, as I said, in 1873, and would stand outside bars in the morning and say, "Good morning." She would say to the bartender, "Good morning, destroyer of men's souls." And by 1900, she had a vision when she was living in Kiowa, Kansas. And it said to her, "Take something and throw it at these places." And so she takes rocks and throws them at the bars. Well, one day she comes home and her husband says, a hatchet would be a better thing. And that's how the term Carrie Hatchet Nation, Carrie Amelia Nation, Carrie Hatchet Nation. She's arrested some 30 times during her period involved in temperance. And between 1900 1910. She actually dies in 1911, so is not the one, she does not actually witness Prohibition coming, but this is an excellent picture of her, and was arrested some 30 times, where when she got in a bar, she would tear it apart with her hatchet. History in the US, beginning in 1893, with the urban immigrants, especially the Germans, enjoyed alcohol, and many of the others did too. But the people that were that were in favor of Prohibition, they saw saloons as breeding grounds for political corruption. And as an aside here, you've heard the term free lunch. Well, the free lunch was served in the saloons. Why? Well, they're not making any money on the lunch. Why are they doing that? Because the lunch would be heavily heavy salted items on it, meats and crackers and that sort of thing. And so the men would buy more liquor. That's why they served them the free lunch. It wasn't a free lunch because they were nice. It was a free lunch because they were going to have need to have some more to drink, and they would buy more liquor. That's why they served the free lunch. The Anti-Saloon League comes in 1900, opposed to saloons, and businesses, churches, and community leaders supported Prohibition, as we see here. There's a strong support in the rural areas. Businesses supported Prohibition because it reduced absenteeism and productivity. Henry Ford had a thing called the sociology department, and that department would go literally out to houses of men who were being paid $5 a day at that point, and that was a big deal back then, beginning in 1914. And the sociology department would inspect the workers' homes. They would go to their neighbors and say, does this person drink too much alcohol or send too much money back to the old country? Because this was one of the things that they were pushing for Prohibition, and Henry pushed for Prohibition too. Here's some posters: safeguard the babies, parents drinking weakens children's vitality. I don't see how necessarily the connecting thing there, but they have some statistics. Abstaining parents had only 1.3 weekly children, but drinking parents had 8.2. So the percentages where it was for Prohibition there. Help to keep him pure. Please vote against the sale of liquors. So somehow children are not pure when their father drinks alcoholic beverages. Another one: which gets your vote, mother or the saloon? In other words, single men, they're they're going to choose mother or the saloon, or drinking, in other words, and they should choose mother, obviously. Saloon or the boys and girls. If you choose a saloon, the boys and girls will suffer and be lost. The real issue. And here I think is the best one. Lips that touch liquor shall not touch ours. That is, and we won't go into any further than that. That's just enough to say with that right there. There were preachers that preached against liquor. They preached for prohibition. Billy Sunday, here's one here. He was actually born in the 1860s, died in 1935, was actually a professional baseball player in the 1880s until he decided to stop drinking and became in the 1890s a advance man for a revivalist named Wilbur Chapman. He was a tent preacher from the 1890s until about 1917. And the thing about Billy Sunday is he would gyrate around. He would stand on the podium like you see in the picture here, dove across the stage, smashed chairs to emphasize his points. And he had a saying, liquor is the bloodsucker of humanity. It's God's worst enemy and hell's best friend. He did very well until about World War I. And then after World War I, it isn't until 1920, by the way, WWJ, your 950 radio, is the first commercial radio station in the United States. Its first program was August 31st, 1920. And the initial thing was to play a song from World War I, the Roses of Picardy. And that was broadcast to all of 100 radios that existed in Detroit at that time. Its original call numbers were not WWJ, they were 8MB. And it became WWJ and is still around today, as we know. Prohibition in Michigan. In 1852, and Michigan becomes a state in 1837. So less than 20 years later, there's prohibit production or sale of alcoholic drinks. Well, that didn't last very long. That was declared unconstitutional relatively quickly. In the early 1800s, the campaign continues for prohibition. By 1911, and that's just a couple of years before World War I, 48 of the 83 counties in the state are dry. Now, here's one you probably hadn't heard. On November 7th, 1916, the state of Michigan had a vote. Shall we prohibit the sale and production of alcohol? And it was voted in November 7th, 1916. On May 1st, 1917, so approximately 6 months later, the amendment takes effect. But there you can see in red, there's no prohibition in Ohio. So as a result of that, guess what? This is the Dixie Highway. Now, the Dixie Highway is about 60 miles of road between Detroit and Toledo. That was before we had I-75. And the Dixie Highway still exists today, parts of it. You hear Dix Toledo, or you hear Dixie Highway even sometimes in Lincoln Park. It's Dix Highway. Dix Toledo is in Southgate. There's portions of Telegraph that were the Dixie Highway. So what does the whole Dixie Highway have to do, in fact? What happens is in 1915, it's the 50th anniversary of the end of the Civil War, 1865, 1915. And so they start a promotion in the South to connect the North and the South by creating this thing called the Dixie Highway. The Dixie Highway was not, though, like I-75, which is a completely different road, completely paved road. And it just actually, I-75, I don't know if you know, goes all the way. And the Dixie Highway went this way too. It went from Miami all the way up the East Coast and then into the interior parts of the country. And then it ends in Sault Ste. Marie. So Dixie Highway was to bring the North and the South together. It was never actually a separate road. Portions of the road were paved and called Dixie Highway. Other portions of other roads that were the Dixie Highway were just given the name Dixie Highway. But it does begin in Miami and it went all the way north. So the Dixie Highway becomes the way from Ohio to Michigan up to Detroit, you can get booze into Michigan. The papers create a whole new name for it. What's it called? It's called Avenue des Booze. And you could bring, have a family in a car as a cover and have booze in the trunk. They had the electric railway, which ran between cities then, which was called the interurban. And you could bring a suitcase or a shopping bag full of booze. There were known to be hollow bread that was hollowed out, so you could put booze in the bread, a bottle of booze. Gas tanks were half booze and half gas. Some 1,000 people were arrested within the first month, but there was only a $20 fine. Now, why was this worth actually smuggling this booze? Well, in Toledo, you could buy a quart of booze for $2, and you could sell it in Detroit from between $8 and $15. So that's at least a 400% profit there. So that's why they're going on the Dixie Highway. And here, a car has been pulled over, as you can see. The cop is standing there, and each one of those boxes has several quarts of booze. By the way, we don't drink quarts anymore. We drink fifths, which means it's 4/5 of a quart, actually, or 1/5 of a gallon. So that's how the term fifth came into being. Quarts are not, we don't drink those anymore, but quarts were the big thing back in the 20s. The blind pig. Okay. It was said that there were 25,000 blind pigs in Detroit during Prohibition. Prohibition, again, is a 14-year thing. It's not just something that happens for a month or two or for a couple years. 25,000 blind pigs. And I'm going to get into a little more detail. But here's a question, too. Most people don't know, but where does the term blind? We know what a blind pig is. It's a place where you can get illegal booze. But where did the term come from? And this is where the term came from. So in the West, where they were more in favor of prohibition in the western part of the country, in the 1870s, to evade the law of in several states or in counties that were dry, a man would put up a tent outside of a small town, and he'd put a sign outside and it said, "See the blind pig for 10 cents." So people would pay their 10 cents and they would go inside of the tent, and there is no blind pig, but there is a glass of whiskey there. So that's how the term blind pig comes into being. So if you hear the blind pig, we know what a blind pig is, but where did it come from? It came from trying to sell the idea of a, quote, blind pig, knowing that you were going to go in there and get a glass of booze. That's why you paid your 10 cents. So that would have been in the 1870s, many years, 150 years ago. Also, terms for a blind pig are the speakeasy, which means speak softly so you don't attract much attention, and that would be spoken at the blind pigs were at the door. Booze at that time, illegal booze, is called various names, a couple of them, just a couple. Rot gut was one you probably heard of, coffin varnish, and again, there was all kinds of ways to dilute the booze, and yes, it would have had all kinds of different things in it, including maybe varnish too. The blind pigs, here's one. I want to get a picture so that you didn't think that, well, all the blind pigs are only men use blind pigs. Well, no, here we have women are using blind pigs, and they seem to be very happy about it. By 1923, and again, Prohibition starts January 1920. That's when it's effective. By 1923, criminal gangs have taken over all of it. So they're taking over how the booze is going to get in from Canada, and we're going to deal with that shortly in a lot of detail. But they've taken it over on both sides of the river. And of course, the big gang in Detroit is the Purple Gang, and I'm going to talk about the Purple Gang. So you hold your questions on that. Now, nationally, again, the WCTU, Women's Christian Temperance Union, formed in 1873. Anti-Saloon League in 1900. So this idea that prohibition is building. Rural versus urban. The rural people tend to be for prohibition versus the urban, which are not for prohibition. And all of your immigration in the United States occurs between 1870 and about 1920. that 50-year period there, most of those immigrants are going to urban areas, not to rural areas, but to urban areas. And therefore, and especially Detroit was filled with a lot of Germans and various other ethnic groups. Now, the World War I war effort, that speaks to what's happening here is that the war effort meant you saved grain. So Prohibition saved grain to feed the troops. And this was also used in other wars, but this particular one was used in World War I. Finally, the 18th Amendment to the United States Constitution is passed in 1919. It says that the importation, sale, and transport of alcohol is illegal. Not the consumption, though. They didn't make that illegal. So you could still drink it if you could get it. This becomes enforced January 17th, 1920. And again, that's the 18th Amendment. So when does rum running start? Within hours. And this is what they did. They ran the rum running in. Remember, Canada is not, there's no prohibition in Canada. And if anybody knows, down in the river, there's actually where the Shane Park has been changed, I think, to Aretha Franklin Theater now. But right across from Shane Park is the Hiram Walker Distillery. So literally 2 miles across at the most, maybe even only a mile at that point. They're making booze right there. This is a 1921 boat. Looks like a Chris Craft. Chris Craft doesn't come around till later, but I'll talk about that in a few minutes. But you could buy for $100 a V12. In other words, you got 12 cylinders there pumping it out, and for $100. That's 400 horsepower, which is a lot even today, and was very much back then. So this is what eventually evolves in today's cigarette boat. You load it up with booze in the back and anything you could get behind you too, where the two men are sitting, and get across the river in just a couple minutes. It'd be very short. A river crossing is this one, and a man is laying there and he's looking to make sure that it is clear. The boat that is in the water below him is not a rum runner boat. That's just something to get around it. So don't think that is. They would, the spotter here is in 1929. This picture was taken. So he would be spotting to see that there was no, what they call, so the guys on the river, and we'll talk about them shortly too, were called revenuers. So the revenuers are the police, the river police in effect, that are trying to stop boats from getting across. In this area right here, they would load up and get across the river quickly to the 17th Street dock, 17th Street in West Detroit. And there's a story of, various stories happen. And probably one of the ladies said that her grandfather was a rum runner. I believe it. Probably almost any story you hear about Prohibition is going to be correct. There were rum runners everywhere. There were blind pigs everywhere. My own family had a blind pig out on a lake called Mandan Lake near Cass Lake. And one of the uncles was arrested and spent time in jail. And the deal was at that lake that you knew when you could see across the lake, and you can see this one house, and it had a red and a green light. Well, when the red light is on, don't go there. It was dangerous then. But when the green was, oh yeah, they're open and they're a blind pig. Once they got across, they would unload quickly. You can see them pulling out bags and boxes of booze here. And they were taken to secure warehouses. The New York Times dubs the Detroit as the rum capital of the nation. The New York Times did that. It is said in more than one article that 75% of illegal booze that came into the U.S. came across the Detroit River. Most was sent to Chicago, and we're going to deal with that a little later. Said to be 500,000 cases a month. That is a huge number. At one point, the illegal booze in Michigan was worth $215 million a year. $215 million a year, and that was more than the auto industry. So the booze that you're seeing here would be taken to well-guarded warehouses. A lot of it went to Chicago, but much stayed here too. a rum runner hideout that still exists today. So they would be on the river with a boat, loaded up, come over here to the Americans, from the Canadian to the American side. This is on Grey Haven. This house still exists today. I was at a talk about a year ago. I gave this talk, and a man came up and said, yeah, I know where that is. That's down the street from me. I live in Grey Haven. And he's talked to the guy that owns it. He said, yeah, we still have the thing there. I mean, you could still actually see what. So they would pull in there, and then they could unload and then distribute it quickly. Grey Haven, again, is a man-made island in the Detroit River. And it's north of Belle Isle on the American side, obviously. But the rum runners weren't afraid to go out in the winter either. So here's a picture of one. This would have been downtown in Ecorse, probably. They were known to put skids instead of tires on the front of their cars. And the rum runner says that the thin ice was scarier than the revenuers. So they were afraid of the ice as much as they were afraid of the revenuers. They also built custom boats with sleds on them, so that if they got to the open water, they could just go into a boat type of situation, not have a problem. Another picture of them coming across. One more. This is really good, where they have they're pulled by hand. They would put it on, say, today we'd call it maybe like a pallet full of booze, cover themselves with a sheet and the pallet with a sheet, so they basically disappears. Basically, it was, especially if there's like a snowstorm. But there were hazards like this. And if you look to the left, in the center of the left center, the guys are standing there, but to the left of them, we got the booze out. So unfortunately, some of it dropped in the water there. This truck was gone. You could never get it out. It was going to sink. But the important thing is the booze got pulled out first. Now, initially, they had river enforcement. This is a picture from 1932. And there's about 30 boats here, actually. Not all of them are shown, but that's what the information from the article says, that there's about 30 boats on the river at that point. In 1920, when they start, the revenuers, again, the government, has one patrol boat. So they're not going to do much at the beginning. And again, you're going to be able to get across the river in those rum running boats in 2 or 3 minutes. It's fast. The river's only, at one point it's 2.5 miles wide, but down in Detroit it's close more to a mile or a half a mile. In 1923, again, the organized gangs take over. So they're going to be much more clever about getting across. And rum running is happening mostly at night, but also during the day when they think they can get away with it. So that's going to happen. Now, what was this kind of money that you're going to be able to bribe people? Because they want to get the rum runners want to get their booze over there. And they could bribe one of these revenuers. The revenuer would make, his wage was $1,800 a year, but the bribe was $1,700 a week. So you can see why these revenuers would take the money. $1,800 is their annual salary, but a bribe could be $1,700 a week. So they'd be easily willing to take the money. It was dangerous. It was not an easy thing. Between 1920 and 1927, the U.S. Prohibition officers had 47 killed. So it was a dangerous thing too. When they caught the rum runners, they would throw the booze over the side, okay? Now, on the other hand, up in Lexington, which is north of St. Clair in Lake Huron, an incident happened there in August of 1928 where they caught some rum runners, and they had all these bottles of beer. And they said to the local people, well, where's a place that, where you can really dump this? And the local people said, oh, over here, you have to come over here. So they took it by this dock and they dumped all the booze in there. And the local people said, that's 20 feet deep. Nobody can go down and get it. So there's no problem. Well, local people were lying because it was only about 6 feet deep. And so that was party time that night. But when we think of the rum runners, the actual boats and the men, how much did they really stop? It's estimated they only stopped 5% of the booze. 5%, not 50, not 50. 5% was stopped by the revenuers. So it didn't work out that well. One last picture of the revenuers themselves. At this point, we wonder about Chris Craft. I mentioned it earlier, and that boat in the beginning looked like a Chris Craft, but that was in 1921, so it was somebody else that made that. Chris Craft doesn't start until 1924, and he's in Algonac, north of Detroit there. So 500 barrels of booze here caught by the revenuers, and it's just Canadian beer that was caught when they were trying to bring it over. Now, smuggling by ferry, you say, well, you know, we got the bridge and the tunnel. Why do we want to have smuggling by ferry? The bridge wasn't built until 1929. The tunnel was not built until 1930. And so, for the greater part of the Depression, from 1920 to 1929, all the booze had to be taken over, basically, by ferry, unless you were going to, if you're going to do it yourself, personally, this was it. And this is the LaSalle, it's a ferry boat. This actually became a boblo boat in the 40s. From 43 to 46, this was actually used as a boblo boat. From 20 to 29, the only way you could personally get across the river was to take a ferry, and then you'd have to figure out how you're going to get the booze through that way. So again, ferry, and this becomes a boblo boat in the 1940s during the war. The Ambassador Bridge is actually opened in November of 1929. Here it is, a picture of this, it's not finished yet. Cost some $23 million, would cost a whole lot more than that today. And for 2 years, it was the longest bridge in the world, for 2 whole years, and then another bridge took over. It is still today, the Ambassador Bridge is still today the busiest border crossing in North America. Still today, the busiest border crossing in North America is the Ambassador Bridge. It's 1 3/4 miles from end to end. That includes the bridge structure and other roads leading up to it also. The Maroon family still owns it. We've known in the past that there have been various things that they've fought to the second bridge. The second bridge is under construction now. I don't know the status of that at this point in time, though. But besides the bridge in 1929, then we became, 1930, the Detroit-Windsor Tunnel, better known in 1930 and onward as through Depression, which is again until 33. So from 30 to 33, it's really called, by the people that know, the Detroit-Windsor Funnel, F-U-N-N-E-L, because that's exactly what it was. A lot of booze came through there. Smuggling was through there. My mother was a smuggler through there, and this is the story. She would have been about 18 or 19, and there was 5 girls and 1 boy, and they would go over to Canada to visit friends and family. And then when they came back, my grandfather would buy a booze, a quart bottle of booze for each one of the girls, and told them to put it between their legs under their skirt and just be quiet. And so my mother was a smuggler too, and we're going to, so that's a thing that stays in the family. The Detroit-Windsor Tunnel, is it all a tunnel? Is it a tunnel under the river? And the answer is no. The tunnel is actually, under the river, it is 9 steel tubes that were welded, watertight, sealed, and then sunk in the river. And a tunnel was dug from the Canadian side to the 9 steel tubes, and a tunnel was dug from the American side. And the tunnel total from one end to the other is about 120 feet short of a mile, or 5,160 feet is what the tunnel actually is. But it is not a tunnel under the river. It is 9 steel tubes welded together, sealed, and dropped in the river. And then tunnels were dug to it. The Canadian tunnel is over 900 feet. The American tunnel is about 400 plus feet. And so the Canadian tunnel happens to be longer. Smuggling increased dramatically after this because people, like I said, individuals like my family, could just do that. These are the guys that are working in the tunnel there. So it's cranking around to 90 years old now, 90 years old this year, having gone in 1930. It is half owned by Windsor, and a company called Syncora Guarantee, which is a Bermuda insurance company, actually owns it. The Detroit sold part of it during the bankruptcy back in 2014. Smugglers. This lady looks like she has a special canvas like vest on, so she can get booze back there. And another has basically a water bottle. And again, my mother was a smuggler. And here's a lady. Oh, she has a very nice coat on, but oh, look, when you take the coat off, there's so much booze that's piled around at the ends of her skirt there that she can really move a lot. There were other ways they did it. Here's a man that has all these separate things, and again, a vest that's actually built to carry all of those specifically. And how about this? Let's smuggle on the bottom of the river. So what's happening here is that the island over there is called Peche, P-E-C-H-E, or Peach Island. That's a Canadian island. That's in the river north of Belle Isle. As you come down through Lake St. Clair and you come down the Detroit River there, you will see this island first. There's a house there. I think it's still inhabited today, but that's obviously, this was taken back during Depression, so the Prohibition. Here they would have a submerged houseboat there, but basically what you're doing is you would put the booze on a sled, and the motor in the second part of the picture below there, which is gasoline, like a car motor, and that would drag the sled all the way across, and you could get your booze over that way. There were also it was known that this is 1929. There was 7 hearses were going across. This is before. This must have been taken. Maybe these were taken across in some other way, because this is like just before the bridge is actually completed. But 7 hearses, and they opened up the caskets, and they were full of booze. 720 quarts of liquor in this funeral hearse. And others, 7 hearses went with it. So there's about 100 in each. Here's a nice, oh, we got a load of lumber here, don't we? No, what we have here is a smuggling operation. So the truck here has been built so it looks like lumber hanging off. You take that out and you can put the booze right in there. Now, stills, oh yes. This is a commercial still. This is not a still that you would have in your house. So they would put these in different places. And one thing I forgot to mention, in the Prohibition law, it said you could make 200 gallons of wine or cider in your house at that point in time. And so that's really, so you can make wine in your house, but you could only make up to 200 gallons, and or cider. So you couldn't make booze. If you made booze, they would come and, if they found out about it, they would come and destroy the stills. So this is a commercial still. So this is really pushing it out for the gangs, especially. Another one, well put together. It's going to put out a lot of booze, hundreds of gallons of booze. But this is the type of thing that you would have in your house. When the police came on these, they would confiscate all of it, because even if you tried to destroy it and leave it in the person's house because you didn't want to be bothered taking it out, people would be able to put it back together. So this is the whole idea. So the object on the left especially is going to tell you the story. You've got to ferment the corn or whatever you're going to use, the grain or whatever you're going to use, and you got to ferment it to make alcohol. And so bathtub gin cannot be made. You can't make gin in the bathtub, again, as I've said earlier. Some more of these, again, you'd have to take them away. If you didn't, they would be able to be used again. This is the busting of an illegal still in 1929 in Detroit on Gratiot Avenue. I don't know any more about it. That must have been many, many barrels of beer, because it wouldn't have come out like that. I mean, this is all staged, but that was a busting of it. They wanted to take a great picture. And I've got another one coming up too. That's cool in Hamtramck. This happened on Gratiot Avenue during Prohibition. If they found a still and they found the bottles, they'd have to break all the bottles, because if you can't leave the bottles, you got to smash them. Otherwise, whoever has made them, well, use them again in some particular way. If there were any of them left, they would go scrounge through and find those. You can see some that are actually standing. Okay. So here, pouring it into the gutter, yes, that happened too. But again, they'd have to break those big bottles then, because they'd be used again for sure. And here's the other one I was talking about, the illegal smashing and illegal. This is still in Hamtramck. This is great. But they also busted up blind pigs that were still in buildings like this. This is a blind pig that's being broken up right there in place. And busting an illegal warehouse. Tivoli, Klings. Oh, we have Stroh's there. Yes, we have a couple of cases of Stroh's. And you probably know that, just a reminder, almost most people know. If you don't know, how does Stroh's got through the Prohibition? Stroh's brewery, they made ice cream. And of course, Stroh's ice cream is still around today. But here we have a couple of local cases of local Stroh's beer right here. The Purple Gang. Okay. What was the Purple Gang? Well, the Purple Gang was actually a group started by 4 Jewish guys who were brothers named Bernstein. They are not related at all. I'll go right off at the beginning now and say they're not related to the Sam Bernstein law firm at all. They're not. They just have the same last name. They start out as petty thieves and extortionists, and they're living on Hastings. Hastings would be I-75 south of, and this is turn of the century, 1900, 1910, 1915, like that. And that is I-75 south of 94, which is called technically I-375. And Hastings was taken down completely. It was later to be a black neighborhood for many years, but it was taken down completely for the freeways that are put up in the 50s and 60s, and the extension of the 75 there. So just give you an idea of where they lived. It said there's 4 Jewish boys with the last name Bernstein, and they are extorting kids and stealing apples. And so where do they get their name? This is in the early 1900s. Well, the story is that 2 grocers were talking to each other, and 2 shopkeepers. And one said to the other, "These boys are not like other children of their age. They're tainted. They're off color." And the other shopkeeper says, "Yes, they're rotten, purple, like the color of bad meat. They're a purple gang." And so that's how the term purple gang came into being. This is some of them here. Does not, in fact, include the Bernsteins. But the gang they would hijack the booze from other alcohol from older and more established criminal gangs. By the way, let's stop for a second. The term hijack. We know hijack means to basically steal a car, truck, that sort of thing. Where does it come from? This is another thing from Prohibition. So men would, and the trucks were smaller back then. We didn't have the semis like we do. There were a lot of local trucks that were driving around constantly on roads, and especially out in the country. And so the story is, and it's true as far as I know, that it starts from the idea of guys would step out from the road and wave a guy down and then walk up to his car and say, "Hi, Jack," and then pull out a gun or just say, "You got to give up your truck or I'm going to beat you up." And so that's where the term hijack comes from. I like to throw these little things in every once in a while. People are kind of interested in that. So the Purple Gang is hijacking other older criminal gangs' booze And by the mid-20s, which is the middle of Prohibition, they are taking over the situation in Detroit. They actually are brought in as a sort of early 20s, when they're in their early 20s, the Purple Gang, to act as kind of muscle for different other situations. So there was a place called the Oakland Sugar House, which was on Oakland Avenue in Detroit. So remember, you could make a certain amount of wine in a certain amount of hard cider, so these sugar houses could exist. So the sugar house, the Oakland Sugar House, hires the Purples to be their muscle in the mid-20s, and eventually the Purples come in and take over. But just as an aside, one of the men that ran the Oakland Sugar House was Henry Shore, and he had a son whose name was Mickey. And so the Mickey Shore that some of the older ones of us that may remember the old car stereo things with Mickey Shore, his father was part of the Oakland Sugar House during Prohibition and made a lot of money his father did at that point in time. The Purples take over Detroit by the 1920s. They are involved in a thing called the Cleaners and Dyers War, where they're hiring themselves out as hitmen, and the cleaners and the dyers in Detroit were being held up, basically protection $1,000 a week for protection against violence. And so that was something that's going on by 1927. By 29, the Purple Gang is involved with Al Capone, and here's one of them. Ray Bernstein was one of the Purple Gang, and he actually is involved in some things later on. We're going to go into that in a minute or so. Joe Bernstein, the four brothers, the Bernstein brothers. Abe Bernstein, and there is no picture of the other Bernstein. Is Isidore. I could not find a picture of him. So the Bernsteins are running the Purple Gang, and they're involved in various things. They are so strong that when Al Capone wants to move his operation into Western Michigan, the Purples go over and they meet with him and they say, look, Al, you can have Western Michigan west of US 31. You don't go east of you don't go east of US 31. And Al agreed. That's how strong the Purples were. They were involved in the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, February 14th, 1929. What's the story here? Here's what was going on. Al Capone and a guy named Bugs Moran were fighting for the territory in Chicago. And Capone had set up a thing Moran had set up a thing where he was going to, 7 of his men were waiting in this warehouse in Chicago on St. Valentine's Day, February 14th, 1929. And Moran was going to take a delivery of hundreds of cases of booze. And so his men are waiting inside. Moran pulls up and he sees a car pull up also around the same time, just before him. And so Moran stays in his car and he watches. And out of the car comes 5 men, 2 in police uniforms and 3 in plain clothes. And they go inside. And so Moran says, I'm not going in there. And he takes off. What these 5 men did was they took the 7 men, lined them up facing the wall, and pulled out the Tommy guns and killed them all. And so the St. Valentine's Day Massacre becomes a sort of a thing in Chicago where the people had already seen gang killings, but even the people at the top, people with money were saying, we've got to do something about this. But backing up a little bit, one of the Purple Gang was one of the 5 men who shot the people at St. Valentine's Massacre. That's how much they were involved in crime outside of Michigan. As a result of the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, again, though, the people, like I said, in Chicago, the upper people, especially in law enforcement that were straight, that weren't held under the thumb of the mob, start going after Al Capone and know that they're not going to get him for prohibition. And that's how they get him in 1931 for tax evasion. That's how he goes to prison. And he eventually dies in 1947, not in prison. He has been released. He gets released in 1941, but he dies in 1947 in his house in Florida at that point in time. So the Purple Gang, though, are the strongest. So what happens to the Purple Gang? Why do they actually get beat eventually? And what happens to them? All right. It's 1931, and the Prohibition is still going on. They don't know it's going to end. Doesn't end until 33, and it doesn't. And Franklin Roosevelt runs for office in 1932, November, to repeal Prohibition, and people are for it at that point in time. The Purples, meanwhile, have a thing going on. So there's an American Legion convention coming to Detroit in 1931, and there's 3 guys from outside of the Purple Gang. Let's just call them the outsiders. We don't have to get into names. And the Purple Gang is being these guys from the outside are hijacking their friends, booze, and enemies. They're double-crossing business partners, and they couldn't stay within their boundaries. And the Purple Gang, it bothered them, obviously, because somebody's trying to come in and move in on their space. So these 3 outsiders say in the spring of 1931, okay, we owe you money, they're saying to the Purple Gang, and we will pay that, but we really want to get into the American Legion Convention coming in August of 1931. If we can get a part of that, after that, we'll pay you back. There'll be no problems. And the Purple Gang says, okay, fine. Let's meet. Ray Bernstein, one of the brothers, as I showed you in the beginning, says, okay, fine. And he tells a friend of his named Sally Levine, who is a gambler. He says a bookmaker, actually. He says to Sally, okay, tell the 3 outsiders, we can do that. We'll wait until after the American Legion Convention, and then we'll settle up after that. But let's meet at the Collingswood Hotel, and let's meet there just to make sure everything's all right. So the Bernsteins, the Purple Gang, 4 of them, Ray Bernstein and 3 other guys, they go into to meet in Collingswood with the 3 outsiders. The outsiders show up with Sally Levine. They talk a little bit, and then at a prearranged signal, the Purple Gang pulls out their guns and kills all of the outsiders right on the spot. And this is what it looked like. So there's a body right there. There's another one actually further in the floor. You can't see it so much in that right above the man that is already dead there. So these 3 are killed, left, and the 4 Purple Gang guys take off, and they're caught within 48 hours and convicted of murder on Sally Levine's testimony. They're sentenced to mandatory life without parole, and they go off to Jackson Prison. This really busts the Purple Gang in Detroit. There's already internal problems within the gang. They're not able to hold things together, and it breaks up the Purple Gang at this point. And what happens is the East Coast comes in with Lucky Luciano. This is the beginning of the coming of the mafia to Detroit. What happens to the Bernsteins? Well, Abe actually goes to prison with the others, with 2 others, and he's out in '64 after a stroke. He dies in 1966, 2 years later. One of the others dies in prison. A third one gets out and has a life after that. He lives into the 60s. He gets married. He has children. A man named Harry Keywell. Sally Levine goes off to France and is never heard from again. But the Collingswood Massacre is basically the end of the Purple Gang in Detroit and their control of crime and prohibition. Michigan is the first, when prohibition is repealed in 1933, Michigan is the first to vote for that amendment to the Constitution. And here on May 5th, 1933, what happens is, this is May 5th, 1933, and that's Bernard Stroh pouring the first booze for this American Legion convention. And what Michigan has done is, Michigan decided, oh, as of a particular date in May 5th in this case, which is right here, that the Michigan legislature says, as of this date, beer that has a low alcohol content is declared not alcoholic, even though it has some alcohol, but it's not alcoholic. And so so Michigan is basically repealing its local, again, the state had done it first in 1916, and now they're repealing their own. And what's going to happen is the national is going to come after that. And that's the National Repeal Day, December the 5th, 1933. And you can see everybody's drinking their booze there and having a great time. So why did it fail? Well, you can't legislate morality. Supply. You restrict supply, but not demand. So you restrict the supply, the production of it, but the demand, the people wanted it. They still wanted it. There's a disregard for the law, as we can see. So people don't see themselves as really breaking the law when they're drinking. They think the law is not something that should be there. There's an increase in crime and corruption, the lack of enforcement, the loss of tax revenue. The economics, what happens is, remember, the Great Depression technically is starting at the end of October 1929. So by the 32, when Franklin Roosevelt is running on an anti-prohibition platform for president of the United States, the money is way down. They need the money. If they can bring back, if they can do away with prohibition, you can tax that booze and help get out of the Great Depression. So the economics is the big thing, really. And that's the end. If anybody has any questions, be glad to take them.
Well, that was so interesting. Thank you so much, Joe, for sharing all that
You're
great
welcome.
information.
Hope everybody enjoyed it.
Yeah, so we just got a comment that said, Mary said, this was so interesting. So I think you covered people's questions. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask.
I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Caitlin, you have any questions?
I don't. I sure did learn a lot, though. I took notes.
You did?
I did. I loved it.
Caitlin, you said you're with
Anthology.
Anthology. If you'd like to have it, I'd be willing to do it there.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Fantastic. All right. Well, if nobody has any questions, I want to thank you all for coming. And Joe, I'm sure you have other great things to share with us. You're a wealth of knowledge, and I just feel blessed that we got to share an hour of your time today. So thank you.
Thank you. And Mary Ann has my list of presentations I can do, so she can decide what she wants to do.
I will definitely be in touch because this was amazing.
Yeah. And Caitlin, if you want to.
Great program, very informative.
Thank you. Hope you all enjoyed it.
Yeah, Caitlin, email me and I'll email you Joe's information. You can give it to Jess.
Sounds great.
All right.
Okay.
All right.
Very
thanks,
good.
everybody. Have a really
Thank
great
you.
day.
Thank you.
You're the best, Joe.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah. Bye-bye.
Everybody feel like they need to go get a drink?
Yes.
Yeah.